Super Mario Galaxy 1 plus 2 has been re-released, and I, for one, am really enjoying discovering again the sharper-than-ever Galaxy 2 after a very long time away indeed. However, one thing that I like to do on this channel is to pay close attention to the credits of Nintendo games, because when trying to anticipate Nintendo's upcoming moves, sometimes these credits can prove quite informative. Therefore, in this video, we're going to look at who was behind the 2025 editions of the Super Mario Galaxy games and see how this fits into what we already know and what we suspect about Nintendo's future plans. First of all, it is confirmed that Nintendo's Redmond, Washington-based Nintendo Software Technology team did indeed work on bringing the titles to Nintendo Switch, with a group of 38 people from that team receiving credits on the Galaxy titles. As is often the case with Nintendo Software Technology's 3D Mario output, they take the decision to put all the credits in one big list without identifying specific job titles. For this reason, we need to pry the list apart a little bit to try to make sense of it. First of all, there are known senior people here. Company President Tim Bechtel, longtime director Vivek Malwani, senior designer Philip Brodsky, and Yoon-Jun Lee, who once reportedly led a 3-month drive to bring Wave Race back to Wii with a balance board peripheral, something I, for one, would really have liked to have seen. All told, about 60% of the team had previously worked on Super Mario 3D World plus Bowser's Fury, and just under 60% of these people also worked on the 2024 Mario vs. Donkey Kong title. In other words, while the whole team was not assigned to these titles, it doesn't look like there's a major expansion in the size of Nintendo Software Technology either. Besides NST's involvement, there are also a number of people from Nintendo's engineering support group. There are people who have worked on multiple first-party Nintendo titles from across their output. Then there's a tiny handful of credits for the Tokyo-based EPD8 group, credited mostly under special thanks. EPD8 are the core Mario team, responsible for every 3D Mario game since their establishment in 2003. Absent completely from the credits is Captain Toad level design lead Yuka Kitahara, who I had previously identified as someone who had worked with Nintendo Software Technology on prior projects and who did not receive a credit on Donkey Kong Bonanza, potentially suggesting that she might have another project with Nintendo Software Technology on the go. My most optimistic guess prior to the Galaxy 1 plus 2 announcement was potentially a smaller Plus game to staple onto Galaxy 2. The lack of a credit here doesn't rule out her having another project, but of course she may simply have left Nintendo, moved to a less high-profile department, or have been on maternity leave. Absent also, even as a special thanks, is Koichi Hayashida, who directed Super Mario Galaxy 2 originally and was a producer at EPD8 for a long time before, until around 2018 or 2019 he moved over to EPD10 to work on the 2D Mario series. The two most senior EPD8 figures, Hideyuki Sugawara and Norihiro Aoyagi, both had prior credits as programming supervisors on Donkey Kong Bonanza. It's difficult to exactly parse what this means, and while it sounds like they were senior individuals on the Bonanza project, it could also mean that they were perhaps the ones responsible for the original pre-2020 development of that game. But when Kazuya Takahashi came on board as director and essentially set up a new team to take the game to the finish line, those people stepped back to work on other things and took on more distant supervisory responsibilities, hence the credit programming supervisors. That theory would be borne out if they had a similar watching brief on behalf of the Tokyo team for the Super Mario Galaxy conversions as they had on Donkey Kong Bonanza. Now, one long shot but fun theory that I've had for a while is that Nintendo Software Technology could potentially be contributing to an original 3D Mario title or spin-off, potentially a third Super Mario Galaxy game. However, while I don't think this is impossible by any means, there's nothing here that would suggest that this is especially likely, and I say this because there's little evidence here of a particular surge in the Nintendo Software Technology team's numbers. About 32 Mario vs. Donkey Kong staff didn't work on Galaxy 1 plus 2, suggesting that the Galaxy titles were not, by any means, the totality of Nintendo Software Technology's efforts over the last few years. But this only tells us so much, as NST do seem to have multiple smaller projects on the go at any one time. Going back to Bowser's Fury, though, while it's difficult to be sure as many of the EPD staff are also in the credits, it seems to me that about a dozen Nintendo Software Technology staff haven't had any credits since that 2021 title, which would track with a separate but still fairly small project being in development over there, or indeed with the usual turnover one would expect of professionals in the industry. What is not evident is any sign that there are large groups of developers who have, air quotes, gone dark. I guess one curious credit here is Kaori Ando, a supervisor with a very long history and also a director of projects including Astral Chain and Fossil Fighters. However, she was credited in an unspecified role on Bowser's Fury and remains on Super Mario Galaxy 1 Plus 2. It's unusual to see someone who was heavily involved in multiple Nintendo projects suddenly go a long stint with only 2 credits, plus a special thanks on Donkey Kong Bonanza. Now, there are plenty of prosaic reasons for this, such as maternity leave stints and the fact that she's obviously attached to EPD8, which simply doesn't produce that many titles. Still, given her previous specialism with connecting Nintendo's core Japan offices with other studios, Platinum and Atlas to name but 2, it feels plausible that she's got a bigger Nintendo Software Technology linked project on her plate. But Ando doesn't always put her name to the biggest projects on the market. She worked on Sushi Strikers, for example, and actually an original project of this kind of scale might be a more plausible fit for Nintendo Software Technology's track record. Now, a note of caution here, because all of this is assuming that the titles Nintendo Software Technology have released were developed more or less sequentially. However, what we don't know is when these games were in fact developed. Nintendo presumably have known for at least 5 years, when the first movie was in development, that they aspired to have a big game featuring Yoshi in the form of Super Mario Galaxy 2 for the 40th anniversary as a potential companion piece to a sequel film. It would make a lot of sense, therefore, for Nintendo to have started developing this title years and years ago. It could easily have been sitting on a shelf for a long time, who knows, perhaps since even 2021. However, even if that were the case, most of the Super Mario Galaxy 1 Plus 2 and Bowser's Fury crossover staff also worked on either F-Zero 99 or the Mario vs. Donkey Kong Switch port, or indeed both. Even under the most optimistic scenario, it's hard to imagine that they could have been working on a significant project for more than about 3 years. Now, that's not to say that they couldn't be involved as part of a bigger team. I still think there's a decent chance of another Splinter Mario team existing, whether under Yuka Kitahara or even Koichi Hayashida, assuming that supporting Shiromori on Super Mario Bros. Wonder wasn't the only thing in this very senior Nintendo producer's in tray for the last 5 years. Still, at this point, Bowser's Fury appears to be an oddity in Nintendo Software Technology's oeuvre, as it's an original 3D Mario game that both they and EPD8 seem to have put considerable effort into jointly. It would make sense if Bowser's Fury was, as has been suggested online, an EPD8 prototype that NST brought to the finish line, rather than a sign of a long-term initiative to try to develop an American base of 3D Mario platformers. The rest of the NST games are fascinating and diverse, but generally less than top price. Online titles, ports, and collaborations with indies such as Snipperclips, rather than full-price titles, although ironically, of course, Mario Galaxy 1 and 2 is the joint most expensive title which doesn't have a peripheral on the Nintendo Switch. All that said, there is clearly a strong link between EPD8 and NST, and I would expect this to continue in some form in the future. At this point, I like to put percentage forecasts on record. These are not divined by some kind of secret mathematical process, rather they just reflect my estimate of likelihood in the moment. Occasionally I look back to see how on point or how wide of the mark I was, and share these conclusions with the audience. At this point, there are a few forecasts I would like to make. I would say there's a 50% chance that we will get another Nintendo Software Technology title by the end of the 2026-27 financial year, which is to say March 2027. The group are on 3 releases in 3 consecutive years, and there are clearly plenty of people there who weren't on the Galaxy titles, and given the scale of much of their output, it seems completely possible that there is something else coming from them. I also think it's 70% likely that Nintendo Software Technology work with EPD8 again, and probably on another 3D Mario port. Super Mario 3D Land is currently the most obvious low-hanging fruit title. The dream of an NST Collaboration Plus game like Bowser's Fury being stapled onto it can't be ruled out, but it does feel like perhaps Bowser's Fury was an exception rather than being something that they will want to do too often. I'll say I will expect it to be announced by the end of 2030 rather than released, as if they do a 45th anniversary celebration for Mario, then Nintendo Software Technology could potentially announce something for 2031 in fact, as they did for the 35th anniversary, where the Bowser's Fury title came at the end of the Mario celebration window in February 2021. It's possible, of course, we could see something before then, but Nintendo does seem to like to target these anniversaries. Now, celebrating 45 years seems kind of ridiculous to me, and Nintendo does sometimes skip far more obvious anniversaries, but the Mario franchise will be a far bigger deal due to the films and theme parks at 45 years than it was at 35, and 35 went out with a bang, so it seems like an opportunity that Nintendo are relatively unlikely to miss. I think there's also a 30% chance that Nintendo Software Technology are working on something Donkey Kong related to release by the end of 2029. This could be another Mario vs. Donkey Kong, which until recently had come along quite frequently, or it could be a port of EPD8's Donkey Kong Jungle Beat, which conspicuously was not announced for the GameCube classics and would be a relatively low-hanging banana to build out of the Switch 2's library of Kong games ahead of a potential Donkey Kong movie. It's even possible, of course, that they're working on their own 2D Donkey Kong game, but this is a far longer shot, and I'm discussing 2D Donkey Kong in another video currently being finalized. I would also give 30% as a chance to Nintendo Software Technology releasing an original IP, by which I mean either something flat out new like Snipperclips and Good Job, or a new branch of an existing franchise like Princess Peach Showtime or Captain Toad Treasure Tracker, or indeed Nintendo Software Technology's own F-Zero 99, which was essentially a spin-off of the original F-Zero series. That'll do it for this video, but check out my previous deep dive into NST if you're interested in learning more about these super developers, and I shall see you next time for another Nintendo Forecast.